Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody else at the service. My name's Brian. I'm an alcoholic. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be at Belfast Recovery Group, the group that I'm a member of, and had the privilege of being a co-founder of this group as well some time ago, which right now feels like a lifetime as I look at this screen with 71 people. Some double screens, so 70 odd people here to listen to, talk about, learn about the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I guess I don't know, I was sort of deliberating today, like I drive quite a bit for work, and I was trying to decide what tone this whole thing should take. And, because the subject matter is what it is. It's 12 traditions that are outlined the way that they're outlined. There's literature, there's written material to support what they mean. There's material to support the context in which they were written. But I don't know, the part that I was struggling with is, where am I at with the whole thing? I normally start off this type of workshop format with like a first step type approach. Let's talk about the problem. Let's talk about the problem that is Alcoholics Anonymous, and those of you who know me know that I focus my time at AA meetings talking about the solution, and only the solution, which is, of course, the program of recovery as it is found in the book Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps within, the context of which is worked with the assistance of a sponsor, which is just somebody who's done it before. Now, how could that be so bloody complicated? I don't know. I guess we find a way in Alcoholics Anonymous, don't we? Because the truth is, I don't have an awful lot of positive things to say about the fellowship that we call Alcoholics Anonymous if I was to tell my story from the very beginning. And I think it's important that I do that, because I guess my truth is my truth. I don't know if there's any new people here, though, so I want to be very careful what I say. And what I'm going to say to you is, be patient with me this evening, because I love this fellowship. And I love the people with whom I stand shoulder to shoulder in the trenches, taking on the mission to rid the world of alcoholism one drunk at a time. So with that being my primary purpose, with that being my mission, with that being the mission of the people with whom I stand side by side, I have decided that the brand of Alcoholics Anonymous is the fastest horse towards that outcome. If there was another way of doing it that was faster, I would pick that. I have no loyalty to Alcoholics Anonymous for any reason other than it just seems to be the best way to get the job done. But let me tell you how that all started. We may not get on to speaking about specific traditions this week. We may not even get on to them next week. I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. But in order to understand the context from which I'm approaching this, I guess I'll tell you a little bit of what Alcoholics Anonymous looked like to me whenever I come into the rooms of AA. Having, first of all, went to a Google search in order to type in my lament. Whenever I went searching for a solution that ultimately brought me to a treatment center, I was very drunk, because that's the way I was pretty much all the time back then. And I put into a Google search words along the lines, I can't remember clearly, but alcoholic needs help, Belfast. And I tell you what I didn't find. I didn't find Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know, this wonderful thing that we have, like there's my friend Mag sitting with my friend Antonio in the United States. They only know each other because of the use of technology that was forced upon us because of a bloody pandemic that came across from the far side of the world, where we had to get off our ass and actually realize that the way that people communicated in the 21st century is with the employment of digital formats. My getting sober was prior to that, and at that stage in this area, in this jurisdiction, it may well be different where you're from, we hadn't got the grips with the fact that domain optimization even was really important. This very notion of that just seemed to be like, well, that's not what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. This kind of a weird, well, God gets everybody sober, so if you're meant to be here, you'll be hit by a bolt of lightning and a thundercloud will bring you through the back door of a church hall or some shit, and I'm saying that with a degree of sarcasm, but I've heard stuff that sounds a bit like that. This lack of taking responsibility for the problem, And I'm putting that onto a spiritual entity who relies on me for to actually do the work, relies on you to do the work. You know, I guess that kind of an attitude will explain why whenever I reached out the hand towards the help, the hand of AA was not there. Do you know what was there? It was the hand of the treatment centres who wanted thousands of pounds from me that I paid because I had no choice. Before I go any further, I'm not knocking treatment centres. It was part of my story. It was part of the story of lots of my friends or whatever. But of course, it wasn't necessary, I suppose, that it had to happen that way. And I would certainly have liked to have the support of Alcoholics Anonymous beforehand, which is what I witnessed happening now. But I found myself in this treatment centre, and these guys did the job that they were employed to do. They were employed to supervise while I was under a detox, and they were employed to keep me away from alcohol for a period of time, teach me how to do some cool-ass Eastern meditation or whatever, and made me comfortable speaking in a room in front of people because I had to do it, whatever. Fucking awesome. What they taught me really well was how to smoke 30 cigarettes a day instead of 20 because I was bored out of my brains, and to hang out with loads of cool people. So, that happened. It was great. But they said to me, well, they described to me what the end goal here is. They were right by saying that I have this progressive illness. It's a fatal one. It gets worse, never better. I don't disagree with that. That sentiment now, even though I'm aware of the full nature of the problem from the perspective of Alcoholics Anonymous, so what they said there was right. What they also told me is I will never recover. That's it. You've got something from which you will never get better. The best that you could hope for is that you could arrest the problem in any 24-hour period and just continue to fight this one day at a time for the rest of your life. And they described that as if that was some kind of a solution, that wasn't a bad life. I guess whenever I think about it now, of course, that's a terrible, that's not a solution. That's crap. That's like, why would anyone want that? But what I wanted was to be a parent to my children again. What I wanted was to have some kind of a lifeline, some kind of veil hope that I could actually survive this thing. And okay, if I have to fight it one day at a time, I'm pretty resilient. My willpower's pretty good. Give me the tools to do that, and I'll do that. They told me that once I get out, I need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where the answer really lies. And they were just a gateway towards that. And I'd attended some AA meetings when I was there. We're saying things that I know are absurd, but nonetheless, I came back and I went to AA meetings in Belfast, and I walked in and I was shivering and I was shaking. And, this lovely man who is now a friend of mine and has since learned not to say what he said to me that day, said to me, listen, you'll be all right. The best advice I can give you is just don't take that first drink one day at a time. Right. So let me frame this. You guys weren't my first choice. I love so many of you, I'm indifferent about most of you, but I love a lot of you, but I don't dislike any of you. You're a bunch of charming people whose time I love to indulge in. But I didn't want to do this thing, right? I tried everything else. I was able to raise some money to throw at people who had PhDs in whatever, and they were going to fix it, whatever. It would not look good that there was other ways that I'd rather do this. So by the time I arrived at your door, I had nowhere else to go. But I tell you what, I 100% knew without the shadow of a doubt is I could not stop taking that first drink one day at a time. And I needed you to give me an answer to that problem rather than telling me to continue to do what I already know that I can't do and to frame that as being the solution. I guess I'll just keep referring to what Alcoholics Anonymous says, because I guess this kind of disconnect between what's said in the rooms and what's said in Alcoholics Anonymous is going to be the framework of this workshop, of the period of, I don't know how many weeks it's going to go on for, probably until you guys get sick of listening to me and tell me to leave. But on page 24, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice and drink. That was me. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. So I had lots of willpower. I describe it as a bit like I had this massive tank of diesel. That was my willpower for a car that uses petrol. It wasn't the lack of willpower. It was just, it was the wrong fuel. It just didn't make any difference how much willpower I had. It was practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. I came out of a blackout once and I was sitting on the floor and I'd vomit down my shirt. And my two kids, my eldest kids who were quite young then, were looking at me, begging me to stop drinking because I was in the house with them alone. And I lifted my bottle of whiskey and walked to the next room and closed the door because that was me being a good dad, shielding my kids from seeing me drinking. You know, that's who I am, left untreated. And then within a week, of course, I woke up the next day feeling terrible. Within a week, I did it again. I brought my then 13-year-old daughter on a holiday to New York. She saved up for half the airfare, you know, and like she did everything right. This was like her dream thing. And I got drunk in the airport lounge. I got drunker on the flight and the way over. We checked into hotel. She was jet lagged and I went out partying. I went to this strip joint where I knew that I could get some cocaine so I could keep drinking all night. And then I woke up the next day so full of remorse that I just did it again the next night. So that's who I am. And I came back so full of guilt and so full of shame that I was never going to drink again. And 4 days later, I lifted a drink and did it again. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So you imagine me, that guy, before I got well, suffering from the guilt, suffering from the experiences of those behaviors, being told, well, just don't do it. Like, how can that make any sense? How can that make sense to the newcomer? And this is where our traditions form the lack of the traditions form the real problem here, is that man was at the top table. That man was the host of the meeting, the secretary of the meeting, as they call them in the physical meetings in Belfast. And there was a speaker who was sitting beside him who was echoing those same sentiments. Now, the people who sit at the top table at the meeting are experts. My friend Chris, who hosted this meeting, is an expert. I am speaking here, so I am an expert. Now, we all know that's not true. Of course it's not true. None of us are experts in Alcoholics Anonymous. But a new person walking into the room has every right to believe that that is true. Do not lose track of that. The very second that words come out of the mouth of somebody sitting at the top table in Alcoholics Anonymous, those people need to know what the hell they're talking about or shut the hell up. Because potentially there are lives at stake. Have you ever heard this one? You know, again, it's with this whole, you know, God gets everybody sober. It's not for us to worry about. This one about how there are no leaders in Alcoholics Anonymous. We're just a bunch of renegades doing our thing and, you know, God's guiding us, whatever. I just want to read you something from the service manual at the back end of Concept 9. We'll dip into some of the concepts as we go as well. And Concept 9 is on the subject of leadership. So, you know, there are leaders in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, there's more than what you would maybe think. And it says here, it's talking about good leadership. And it says this is true, particularly in the area of 12th step work in which nearly all of us are actively engaged. Every sponsor is necessarily a leader. The stakes are as big as they could be, a human life and usually the happiness of whole family hang in the balance. What a sponsor does and says, how well he estimates the reactions of his prospects, how well he times and makes his presentation, how well he handles criticism, how well he leads his prospect on by personal spiritual example. These qualities of leadership can make all the difference, often the difference between life and death. It's maybe easy or convenient to forget that we're in the saving of lives business. And I could take the life of somebody by being a fool. That's how fragile this whole thing is, you know. Can we maybe talk about this? Can we maybe stop ducking the issue? Can we maybe stop hiding behind a misunderstanding about what the first step or the first tradition of unity actually means. It doesn't mean we all sit around in our business meetings afraid to disagree because, oh, we need to unify. It's not what it means. Can we talk about the fact that the state of this fellowship is so poor that we have people coming into these rooms in a very, very fragile state, and I was on the receiving end of advice that could have took my life. I'm so blessed that it didn't. I continued to go around the rooms of AA for a while and decided not to go back anymore. And then I went to one last meeting, and there was a guy from out of town, thank God, who was there, and he spoke of a very different message when sharing. Whenever he's sharing, he was sharing to me. There's a room of 20 people. The other 19 were regulars, and I wasn't. I was the new guy. So he knew what his job was. He knew that he had a job. He knew that his presence in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous was not as a taker. It was not to sit and talk about his problems and lament about his day and how his wife doesn't give him a kiss on the cheek anymore or whatever. He knew that that wasn't the purpose for him being there. He knew that he had one primary purpose, and that was to speak to me, the new guy, the guy still sweating, the guy who looks too nervous to be here. And he spoke of a solution at the end of which you recover from alcoholism. I'd never heard that before. So obviously I thought he was a wacko. And he spoke to me afterwards, and he offered to sponsor me. And in Northern Ireland, you wouldn't believe this, if you guys from out of town will believe this. In Northern Ireland at that time, it was frowned upon to approach people and offer them sponsorship. Some bullshit about you're not giving them an opportunity to deflate their ego or some crap, but he approached me and he offered me sponsorship, and we worked through the 12 steps, and I recovered from alcoholism. And then I met somebody else who I took through this 12 steps to recover from alcoholism, and I kept doing it, and these people kept getting well. It was kind of like this thing that just kept happening. Like, it wasn't bloody complicated. It was all in this book, this one here, Alcoholics Anonymous. And whenever I got to the back end of this book, and on the 12th step, I realized that the guy who had helped me was not this spiritual genius guru that I thought he was. He was just a guy who knew how to read. He'd plagiarized everything that he did from this book. And all I had to do was to copy him because he was copying someone else. And this perfect rhythm was able to continue. There's so many people in our group who don't know who that man was or is, who don't know that whenever he and I met, something happened that caused this thing to happen. And it's not that we're special. It's like in London, there's a thing happening, and another street over, there's a thing happening, and in Dungannon, there's a thing happening. It's just whenever somebody understands Alcoholics Anonymous, they know that they carry the message to other people who in turn carry it to more, and lots of people get well. Like, it's not bloody tricky. But if we're going to say to people things like, if we're going to violate our traditions by saying things like, the best thing we can offer you is just don't take that first drink one day at a time, whenever the best thing we can offer you is a solution to alcoholism, then shame on you. I'm not here to say, well, it's fine, everybody's doing the best they can. They're not. They're not doing the best they can. I'm not like some guy who was brought to a training camp where I was schooled on the traditions. I just read the frickin' books. I just seen that, whenever I'm charged with somebody's life, that it's incumbent on me to make sure that I don't destroy that life. That it's incumbent on me to have, to be a member of a group that looks to our traditions. I did a workshop like this before where I referred to some anecdotal data that was taken from some intergroups in the States that showed the amount of newcomer chips. I think they call them, what do they call them out there? Something else. Anyway, newcomer chips that were sold, and then the amount of 1 year chips, and over the years how that looked. And what you've seen is, it showed that fewer people were recovering and staying sober for whatever. And, I was going to go through all that again, but I just don't have the patience, because just look around you. The problem is as obvious as the nose in your face. And do you want to know if it doesn't look right? Go to one of your business meetings and just look and listen to see if people are saying things like, well, in my opinion, we should do, and I think this is the way forward, and whatever. And in my opinion, I think, rather than in accordance with whatever spiritual tradition or in accordance with what it says within this book written by Alcoholics Anonymous, this is what I recommend. Are you able Whenever you come up with one of your mad ass opinions, are you able to tether it to one of our traditions? Or are you placing personality before principles? Just have a look. Have a look in your own group conscience and see if this is happening. Have a look to see if you're a member of a group where they talk about the sponsor. The first group I joined, they had the sponsor. Somebody came in looking for help, and I was the new guy. I was like, this guy here wants some help. Oh, the sponsor's not here today. If you're in a group like that, then you know that something's wrong, because you know what you have in Alcoholics Anonymous groups, properly run Alcoholics Anonymous groups. You got people going through the 12 steps, and you've got sponsors. There is no other thing. So we don't need to get particularly cryptic and look at stats much. There's a little chart that if we have time, I'd like to get a look at. But just have a look and see if the spiritual principles of Alcoholics Anonymous are being used within your meeting and within your business meeting. Just have a look at seeing whether we're throwing out some of these jazzy little slogans all of the time. Like, I don't know, you need to be careful in case you get horny, angry, lonely, and tired. I think that's what it says, or something like that. Like, what is that? It's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. I know it is. I'm just being playful. But, I've been really, really hungry and drank alcohol, and I've been really, really hungry and not drank alcohol. I've been angry and got hammered. I've been angry and not getting... What is all this stuff? What is all these things that are being thrown around? I do a workshop with some guys on a Monday night, and I sent them a text the other day saying, like, I'm doing this workshop thing on the traditions. I like to start off with talking about some slogans that you hear in AA that don't match what it says in Alcoholics Anonymous, obviously meaning the book and the literature. And can you guys maybe throw some over so I can add it to the workshop, maybe some that I haven't seen before? And oh my word, there's so many. I was reading through them going, this would make your eyes water. There's just so many things that are said in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that are not Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's not okay. It is just not okay. We'll maybe have some fun and have a look at some of them just for kicks and giggles, knowing that behind it there's a very, very serious problem. All right, so one that really gets me is it's a selfish program for selfish people. Have you guys heard that one? Page 62, above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. So Alcoholics Anonymous is a selfish program that says you must get rid of selfishness. Like, what kind of dumbass shit is that? Roman numerals 26, we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane. Page 14, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice with others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. Excuse me. Page 88, fifth without works is dead. The next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12, which is about helping others. To argue that Alcoholics Anonymous is a selfish program is the most absurd thing one could possibly say. It is a program that relies entirely of giving to others. And if you don't do that part of it, you're not doing AA, and there's a high probability you're going to drink again, and you can't blame us because, we showed you that that's what you're supposed to do. It's not a selfish program for selfish people. It is anything. It is a selfless program that promotes altruism through spiritual principles. But whenever I said, if any of you guys heard that one, at least half of the room nodded. Like, how does this cancer get into the bones of Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, I've got some theories on that we might talk about, but we continue to battle alcohol for the rest of our lives, one day at a time. They're not living your life one day at a time, fighting alcohol one day at a time. The two are very different. The title page, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Page 13, at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Page 17, they have solved the drink problem. Page 45, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Page 84, and we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. You guys know that part on page 44, the 10-step promises. We count it sometimes and read it at the end of our meetings. It tells this whole story of how the recovered alcoholic basks in the glory of a miracle. and that it's not difficult or anything. It's just like, it's all cool. I can tell you that my own experience is I haven't had a conscious thought of taking a drink for just over 8 years, and I don't find that difficult. There's no fighting involved in it. I guess there's quite a few more I could go into. I kind of struggle with the God can be God group of drunks and good orderly direction thing, like, but I'm feeling a bit ranty, and if I go down that rabbit hole, I'll probably never come out of it again. The one that I guess that I really struggle with the most is where we encourage people not to work the steps quickly. I don't mean to go through the text quickly. There's different sponsorship lineages of different views on that. But what I mean is to delay before starting. This concept of arriving at a doctor's surgery unwell, and whenever you're invited to speak to a doctor, you say, no, I'm going to sit here and learn from other sick people instead. That notion. And it's very, very common in the jurisdiction of Northern Ireland, and it was certainly something that I was exposed to. And I guess if there was one thing I could fix from the chitter chatter, it would be to try and encourage people to deviate away from that bollocks. Should I tell the story? Yeah, why not? There was someone in a meeting in a place that I'm not going to describe, and because I don't want to. There's no chance you don't know who this person is. Anyway, put it that way. But this lady, 40 years ago, came home to find her husband in bed with her sister, engaged in activities that are not befitting of the situation. And she hadn't taken a drink in her life up to that point. She witnessed this act, completely lost her mind, went on the drink for a month, smashed it every day. Her parents and her family got very worried about her, sent her to Alcoholics Anonymous, and she's been there ever since. And she tells the story, and how I don't have to work any of those steps nonsense, because I just come to these meetings one day at a time and I'm fine. But I was listening to that thinking, well, you're telling the story of somebody who has a condition very different to mine, because your behavior in those circumstances was probably logical. Like, yeah, I can understand why somebody would do that in those circumstances, where, my circumstances are the ones that I described, like, drinking at the expense of the safety of my children. So of course that lady doesn't have to do what I have to do. She doesn't have the same problem that I have. Alcoholics Anonymous I've noticed, appears to have an awful lot of people speaking who don't have the same problem that I have. Is that a worry? Any of you guys worried about that? Any of you guys worried, like, if you're, well, I tell you this, I started to realize how I feel about this kind of thing whenever I was making my amends, and a very dear friend of mine listened to my amends, and then she decided that she would get sober. Now, she didn't tell me that while we were making the amends, but she phoned me a couple of days later and said that she'd gone to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in her local town, and I knew the meeting she went to because I'd been there. And my first thought was, oh my God, I really wish you hadn't gone there. I wish you had told me that she was going to try and get sober through Alcoholics Anonymous, and I would have tried to have helped her. There's a man who came into my life, an old friend who I'd been in contact with for about 30 years. He came into my contact serendipitously a few weeks ago. And anyway, I was telling him my story, and he was saying how he's struggling with drink, but he tried Alcoholics Anonymous and it didn't work. And I couldn't argue with him, because he went to a place that bore the brand of Alcoholics Anonymous and it didn't work. This whole, students who say Alcoholics Anonymous didn't work, they didn't try hard enough. I really struggle with this whole thing of putting the responsibility on God, however you define God, and putting the responsibility on the newcomer who's shitting himself and doesn't know how to get through the next day, rather than saying that this is my responsibility. It is my responsibility to take ownership of this shit show that we're supposed to be running and making the balls of. It's a bit like, I heard somebody saying once, it's a bit like, so Bill and Bob and the lads started this organization. It's a bit like a guy who starts a company and he runs it well into these, into his 60s, and he hands it to his son who runs it pretty well, and then the grandson gets hold of it. And gradually through time, they develop a real attitude of not give a fuckedness about the business. And by the time you get 4 or 5 generations down, it's just a train wreck. It kind of feels like that to me. There's such a big detachment away from the original intention that I don't see an awful lot of caring. Now, that's not true. I see a lot of caring because I hang around with the people and go to the places where the people are focused on the same job that I'm focused on, that Ridding the World of Alcoholics one. So I'm blessed to be exposed to a lot of this. But the newcomer walking into the random room down the street, not too far away from here, good luck. Because the probability of finding the solution is incredibly slim. There would have to be a guy from out of town who just happened to be passing with the solution, which is how I got sober.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Did you hear that? You know, it's not just so uncanny that even my watch knows that that's insane. But think about that, right? You know, and whenever that happened to me, you know, I took my steps really, really, really seriously. I took the contract that I signed on step 3 really, really seriously. I took the responsibility to bear witness really, really seriously. And what was it that I was to bear witness to? If I am to bear witness, what do I bear witness to? You get to bear witness to whatever the hell you want to bear witness to, because your experience is your experience. But my experience is I come into places that call themselves Alcoholics Anonymous. They did not give me Alcoholics Anonymous. They did not even know what Alcoholics Anonymous is, and nobody seemed to give a shit. Then I met a guy serendipitously who was not supposed to be there, and then boom, the world changes. My children have a father. You know, the 20 people who are employed by the business that I was running into the ground are now still employed. Their lives are stabilized and they're able to provide for their families because a man happened to walk into a room he wasn't supposed to be to, and he didn't do anything fancy, he just did what he always did. You know, he followed the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous and how they related to his program of recovery whenever he was in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous. That was it. You know, the answer to this problem is not a sophisticated one. And I guess, why don't we just jump back in history and see if this might bear some resemblance to the problems that the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous have. As we go through the next few weeks, I'm going to refer to some of the history books. This is my favorite, Comes of Age. There's also the one, Pass It On, looks similar, just different title. Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. But if you're like me and you can't be arsed reading all of those, just get stuck into the forward to the second edition in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a pretty good whistle-stop tour of what happened. And I guess if it turns to, where will we pick it up? All right, this turns to Roman numerals 18. So XVIII. So anyway, to give you the background story, Bill and Bob met. They started doing the whole AA thing, sponsor some people. The people they sponsor some people. This whole thing happened that I spoke about at the start. Then halfway down the page, in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership was shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. So great news. You know, the guys were doing very, very little, not getting very far. They got an awful lot of publicity, and then the mushrooming process. You know, they went from that to 8,000 overnight. Now, I've been in business all of my adult life, and I learned quite earlier on to grow really, really quickly is not a good thing. You know, I'm a marketeer and a salesman. I was like pushing sales, like, oh my God, I don't know what to do now. And it all fell apart quite early. That's one of the things I learned earlier on in business. And this is the kind of same process and the same problems these guys had. They weren't able to quality control this thing. You know, our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this. Tell me if any of this sounds familiar to what's going on today. Could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems, and in every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and a first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. So what then happened? Well, a chap called Earl T became a bit of a thorn in Bill Wilson's side. nagging him, going, we need to do something. We need to find a way to put some guide rails in place. Congratulations on the new script, by the way, guys. I wrote something down that you said there, Chris, and I can't remember who wrote it down. Yeah, tools to serve rather than rule. What a beautiful way of putting it. But you also describe them as essential, and I guess that's what these guys seen. We need tools to serve. You know, you could go into a meeting in Cleveland and maybe they're using a Bible, or you might go into one in New York and there's one Bill Wilson style where it's just get loads of people in, you know, and who cares about the quality. And Dr. Bob's doing his thing and sponsoring people really, really well. And, you know, and there's all this disconnect in terms of what's happening. And I often tell the story in traditions workshops how I once had a McDonald's in Hong Kong and I had a McDonald's in Lurgan in County Armagh. And the reason why I picked those two places is I can't think of two places that are further apart culturally. And the product that I had and the price that I paid for it on the whole was pretty much the same. So that's an example of how something could be franchised incredibly well with a consistency in terms of the quality. Now, whether you think McDonald's is a good quality product or not is not what I'm here to debate. What I'm saying is it's the same. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous, we're not trying to find a way to be the same. They're trying to find a way to unify around a common purpose. Now, how that message is carried in different groups can vary, and we'll talk more about that once we get to the fourth tradition. But essentially, they had to find ways to codify. So the next paragraph, they then go on to say, and we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to develop principles by which AA groups and AA the whole could survive and function effectively. And then it goes on to list out what essentially became what they then called the 12 points to secure AA's future. And in a series of Grapevine magazine articles in the 1950s, Bill Wilson dropped in, you know, this is what we're going to do. This is tradition 1. This is tradition 2. And dropped all of this in until ultimately, the 1940s rather, ultimately was ratified at the first annual convention in 1950. And then we had the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. The point I'm going to make, though, is in response to the problems that we see today, they panicked, they freaked out, they got together, they sorted it out, they seen it as an important problem that needed to be fixed. They give a shit that the fellowship that so many people relied on for their lives was falling apart on their watch. Are we doing that today? Do we care to the same extent that these guys did? Thank God they did that, because I'd be dead today. I don't know about you. Now, my intentions as we go forward, maybe not next week. I want to still moan about the problem for a bit more because I think it's really important. I think it's really important to get a real step 1 position on this. And then I'm going to talk about I was going to say the solution as I see it, but that wouldn't be accurate. It's the solution as I read it. Like it's really it's fucking written down. And we'll go through it one by one and we can see how we have an opportunity in our own local groups, in our own local areas or intergroups, you know, or we have the privilege to go to conference, whatever, to turn up fully armed with the tools that these guys designed to ensure that we don't make a pig's ass of it the way we are doing today. I come to this workshop from somebody wanting to say that I am deeply, deeply, deeply dissatisfied with Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not being prophetic and saying, okay, if we keep going this way, the wheels are going to fall off AA. You know, I've got some friends and there's some guys who I sponsor in a prominent city in the United Kingdom whose intergroup is about to collapse because they can't get people to go. So they put people in that don't know what they're talking about instead, thinking that will fix the problem. Like, this is what we're dealing with here. I'll end with this because I think we're supposed to leave time for questions, Chris, aren't we? I'm fine. If AA passes off the scene tomorrow, I'm 100% fine. I've got my program. I'm able to sponsor some people. If I need help, we'll phone up Chris. I'll go and visit my friend Kat, who I've turned to for help many times over the years. My friend Patsy, you know, my dearest darling Susie. I've got recovered people all around me. I've already got the fellowship I need. If somebody flicked a switch tomorrow and AA was to disappear, I'm fine. I'm not doing this workshop for me. But I've got 4 daughters, right? Will they all dodge the alcoholic bullet? I hope so. Some people were throwing stats at me quite recently, which suggests that one of them probably will end up with, I don't know, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But somebody's daughter will. Do you care? Do I care? Are we going to have something left here other than ashes for those people? What about my daughter? What about your daughter? What about your son? What about the child that hasn't been born yet? What about the couple that hasn't met each other in order to conceive the child that hasn't been born yet, who will develop alcoholism like 10% of the population do in some form? Will we have anything left behind that serves the purpose designed by the original founders of Alcoholics Anonymous or not? Well, I put it to you that if we don't start talking about the problem, then I suspect not. If we don't start talking about how fucked this is, and then follow that up with, but this is what we're going to do by looking back to what we should have done all along, then I don't think we're going to have anything left. As I say, I'll be okay. My kids will be okay too, because, I'll just put them in touch with one of you guys. But the other guys' kids mightn't be. So maybe, if it is a selfless program, then maybe we ought to be selfless in terms of how we approach the service structure, how we approach our AA meetings. Realize that, that this thing that we built has people walk through the door. And whenever they walk through the door, there's expectations that they have that we have to deliver. Maybe we should look at it that way. Anyway, I've had an awful lot of fun tonight, and it may not have seemed that way. I'm probably going to continue to rant for a bit next week, and we might get on to the traditions at that point, but bear with me because there's some really constructive stuff to follow, I hope. And I'll hopefully see you again next week. If you don't come back because you find it too hard hitting and you're offended, I understand. Thanks, Chris.